Welcome to the Inner Work Community Podcast, which aims to provide you with language, tools, and guidance in your journey towards personal and relational wholeness. We'll discuss topics ranging from psychology, spirituality, tantra, leadership, sexuality, polyamory, and more. My name is Michael, and I'll be your host for insightful interviews with thought leaders, practitioners, and experts who have a thing or two to share about living an integrated and meaning-making life. Whether you're looking to deepen your connection with your interior world, overcome challenges in your relationships, or expand your psychosomatic horizons with fresh perspectives and paradigms, the Inner Work Community Podcast offers a safe yet challenging space for dialogue and introspection. This is all a gift, so let's go enjoy it together. Well, I have the absolute pleasure to have my friend with me, Mike Maeshiro, to talk to us about, everything about coming out of the church and what it's like to own your sexuality and to enter into who you are and to be authentic. I don't know, Mike, that's a rough way, but maybe you can orient us and start by introducing yourself. Who are you? What did you do? What do you do now? And what are you passionate about?
Great. Yeah. Michael, thanks for having me on the show. I'm honored to be here. So I currently live in Nashville, Tennessee. I moved here almost 4 years ago when I came out as a gay man. And I came out from having while I had an evangelical Christian platform, which, that was an adventure to say the least. But before that, I was on staff at a church in Redding, California. I taught at the ministry school there. I led mission trips. I mentored interns. Before that, at the same church, I was also working in the events department. I was there for 12 and a half years. I grew up evangelical. So at 4, my parents took me to church for the first time, and I got scared into the kingdom, if you will. I didn't want to go to hell, so I was like, I'll take the Jesus ghost to live in my soul and save me from damnation, And then I went through private school and just was deeply evangelical, and then went into ministry. And I was like a poster child for evangelicalism, and the irony or twist or tragedy of all that was I was gay the entire time. And I knew I wasn't allowed to be gay and that we all hated gay people. So I had to hide that. And I tried the best I could for so long. I cannot tell you how much energy goes into pretending to be someone you're not always. It's exhausting and deeply disturbing. So anyway, that happened. And then in my early 30s, I had this radical spiritual awakening where I just could not keep doing what I had been doing this whole time. And by that point, I had built a platform, I had an audience and people were watching me and buying my stuff, and I was flying all over and speaking, and it was awesome. I was living the dream, and it was all predicated on a lie. And I knew the moment I came out and was honest and stopped hating myself for being gay, I would lose all of that. And that's exactly what happened. But it finally got to a point where the loss wasn't enough to keep me in the closet, and the authenticity was worthwhile to me. Mostly I needed to stop hurting other people and being part of systems and institutions that were harming people like me. I had to get out of that. I had to divest, right? And separate myself from complicity to those things. So I did, and it was difficult and painful, and financially, career-wise, socially, theologically, it was devastating. Well, it was hard. I'll say it was hard, but also it was like a rebirth, and I got to evolve and transform, and I'm so glad that I did. And that's the very rough backstory.
Yeah, thank you. The journey of weighing out what you have and what you're going to lose for sure if you step across that line. People can say all day, yeah, well, you will experience more, being more authentic, more whole. You probably didn't have, I don't know, you didn't have those voices saying, yeah, go for it, Mike. It's going to be better. No.
I did have voices, but they were warning me it's going to be ugly before it gets good. And the evangelicals will be the worst. And I was like, really? And they were right. The evangelicals were the worst.
Okay, so question for so all the warnings of like it's going to be bad, yeah, that's what happened. What met you? What met you on the other side of that line that you didn't expect? That has, I mean, you're here today.
Yeah.
You're here today. You're not only here, but you are guiding so many others through that journey for themselves. How did you survive that? Like, what met you and continued to carry you?
Yeah. Several things actually. I feel very privileged in my coming out experience. I don't think a lot of guys come out in their 30s, usually if they come out, it's earlier or it's like way later in life.
Yeah. Hmm.
And so being like fully developed as an adult male, and then coming out was a different experience than guys who were doing it in high school or middle school or whatever, right? So I had a lot more self-control and a self-awareness and emotional maturity going through this. So I could articulate nuance and things a lot better than I would have been able to if it was earlier in my life. So I think just even like connection to myself at that age was a huge benefit. I don't recommend waiting that long, but it did have that perk, right? But I also had a few, I had several close friends who went on this journey with me and they became affirming allies because of my coming out experience. And so they just were with me throughout the rocky waves of the transition. And that was beautiful. And then I also, because of my platform, like I got access to a bunch of other thought leaders and voices who were doing work in queer affirming spaces, specifically within evangelical church and theology, right? And so I got to build relationships with them and they mentored me, and they were probably some of the most beneficial advantages. But on the other side of the experience, what met me in terms of like moving forward and thriving and living in well-being and being well, right? Like, I did not expect this, but I found safety in myself that I didn't realize I had been lacking this whole time. I didn't know. I didn't know that I felt unsafe always. I didn't know what safety felt like for straight people. I had no idea, because it just was never on the table. So I never learned how to metabolize and expect safety. It was never actually on the menu for me. So once I did start feeling that on the other side of this, and I stopped enabling or tolerating homophobia or heterosexism, and allowing it to put me in a second class position, I started experiencing safety in myself, and I would cry just like having that experience and just being like so grieved for how long I'd spent not having that and how many other queer people right now don't have it. And they don't even know, right? Like you don't even know what you don't know, right? That was a game changer for me. Just like getting to have that, like to be able to breathe with my full lung capacity was a game changer, right? Like being able to be in my own body actually, and that this would be a safe experience, and like proving to myself, I didn't mean to do this, but I somehow in some way proved to my inner child, if you will, that I would take care of him finally, that I would stand up for him and I would no longer compromise and let him pay for it. Like I was going to defend him. And like that was a game changer. I didn't know that I was missing that. So that sense of like alignment with myself and solidarity with me, that was a game changer. And I had no idea that I could have that experience, and you can't put a price on that, right? Like I lost a lot, but like to be able to live like that, was, I mean, it's hard to compare. I'm like, yeah, no, I do it again. Like I will never go back to living life that way. That was a nightmare. It was like living in an internment camp psychologically, always. You wake up and go to sleep in prison. So I think those are probably some big ones for me, was like ultimately reconciling with my own humanity and like becoming someone safe for me finally.
Oh, I find myself like, I mean, just when you said breathe with your whole lungs, I found myself taking a breath and just reminded at like the like how our bodies respond, the chemicals that are released when we breathe deep, and honestly, I mean, it's fucking impossible to breathe deep in these high control religious spaces. Like we can call it evangelicalism. I call it the common Christian mythology, because sometimes it's evangelical, but there are Mennonites, there are Quakers that ascribe to this. And one of the big pillars of the common Christian myth is, true authentic self is found somewhere outside of you, right? God has it. God will show you what it is. You know, you're supposed to become like Christ or whatever. And so what that naturally does is it pulls us out of our lived experience. So whatever we actually feel, whether it's bad or good, if it's not in alignment with this external rubric of how a person should feel, then it has to be bad. And I just think that the courage it takes to move towards that anyway, right? To move towards, it's transgressive spirituality is what I call it. It's like, I'm going to move towards my authentic spirituality by transgressing this moral standard.
I love that.
Right? I just like, in order, Jung, you know, Carl Jung says, in order to grow, we must transgress. And I'm just like, absolutely.
Yeah, for sure.
So you mentioned, I asked you in the form to tell me, what do you want to talk about? And you very intentionally used the phrase, the shadow of evangelicalism. You want to talk about helping people who are trying to exist underneath the shadow of evangelicalism. Can you define that, like from your experience? In the experience of guiding people, like what is that? What is the shadow? Name something you can't see, I guess, right? But what is it? How do we know that? How do we know what it is? And then we'll eventually get to, what do you do to help people? Like, how is it that you guide them?
Yeah, God. Okay, so
Elephant.
The thing that comes up first for me when you bring that up is, I mean, I've been out of evangelical church spaces or the Christian mythology spaces for a few years now, thankfully. Like, I'm really grateful for the respite of getting away from spaces like that, because, and it's not just the theology, of course it is absolutely the theology, but it's also the culture. There is so much insistent programming that comes with these ideas, and it's an adherence, submission type relationship where you have to conform, right? And so evangelicals that I talk to today, the rare occasions that I do, I notice there is a vibe to them. And by that, I mean, I feel like I'm talking to a template, maybe a cookie cutter manufactured personality. Like, it feels like I'm talking to a fraction of a human being, like someone who's like kind of new off the shelf, or, you know, like they're not available fully in this conversation. There are a lot of things that are off limits. There are things you cannot say to them. There are code words that if you say them, this is going to go a very distinct way and the energy shifts. Or if there are other things you say, you know, there's just like such a weird conveyor belt experience to talking to evangelicals now for me, that, like, to me, that I'm going to put that under the guise of the shadow. Like, I don't think people in those environments recognize how much of their own authenticity is being replaced by people's ideas from centuries ago that aren't conducive for what it means to be a thriving human being today. That does not regard their unique experience or journeying through the world, that absolutely tries to erase or deny components of human sexuality, gender identity, right? Like, there are so many things about what it means to be human that isn't respected or regarded in these spaces. And so to me, that is a massive shadow to be living under, right? Like, to be sacrificing your own fullness, like getting to actually know yourself and experience the extent of your potential and your capacity as an individual. I don't even mean like on a productive scale. I just mean in like a self-actualization and a relationship with you. Yeah. It is so stunted and limited. And to me, that's quite the shadow to live under. And then you have all these tropes and mechanisms that are already built into the system to compensate for the massive sacrifice you are making from the get-go to not get to know yourself in those ways. Mm-hmm. And then the thing that's going to convince you it's worthwhile is because those things are demonized, or right, they're vilified, they're off limits, they will ruin your life. Satan, the devil, demons are going to, deception is going to take over if you fill in the blank, admit you're human in these ways, right? And so to me, it's so sad. but so real. Purity culture is obviously its own very specific cage around human sexuality and autonomy. So of course monogamy would fall under that umbrella. Homophobia, transphobia would also show up in that space. But then we're talking about, we go into like all kinds of directions, like the family structure and unit, the way the economy is even like considered to be thriving or what looks good there, like is defined for you. It's predetermined based on these. And it's not just theology. We're talking politics, we're talking economics, we're talking interpersonal relationships. This shadow grabs onto every significant area of your personhood and dictates for you what you're allowed to do or be. I'm like, that's a lot. And I'm not trying to be dramatic. It's a lot, right? And there's so many things I'm not saying right now that would go into this. So that's a huge shadow that I'm acknowledging is absolutely a cost here that everyone's paying who actually plays the game. And so much of the work that I do with queer people trying to recover from their evangelical backgrounds and communities and families is firstly helping them recognize the ways that they've been ravaged, the ways that they have been monopolized, right? Like that they've been colonized by these ideas and that there are parts of themselves that have been off limits or criminalized to them in their own minds, right? Like, and purity culture is a huge piece of that. So having to like pull apart, what does the Bible say about this idea, right? And who ratifies that? And is that substantiated? And does systematic theology actually have authority over this part of humanity? And so it's depending on the person, it goes in that direction. I have several people I work with who literally, they just want to talk theology. They have to start there. They can't go anywhere else. They need to know, am I going to hell? Am I going against the Bible? Does God still love me? Right. And, sorry, I could keep going. That's
please. Yeah. Well, so if you were to like sit down with Joseph Campbell, who's like kind of like the mythologist that mythologists pull from, he would say and has said before he died, right before I was born, by the way, I think I might be a reincarnation.
Oh,
no, it was like the year, like months before. I'm like, wonder. No, I'm just kidding. It would be like living the same life again or something. It's like a little less money. But so if you were to ask Joseph Campbell, why this, like, what is the root, right? Because you're saying like it's ubiquitous. It's infiltrated every facet of personal and collective life. And Campbell would say, like, it ultimately comes back to this rejection of the feminine. And so if you look at whether it's sexuality, you look at how capitalism seeks to just extract resources from some people to benefit the few. You look at how the earth is treated. I mean, these are all elements of the feminine, right? The earth, this sense of the collective good, that is in the realm of what we might say is the archetypal feminine. The personal good at the expense of others would be a one-sided masculine. Anyway, so this sense that it's everywhere gets down to this rejection of that which is more open, that which is more receptive, that which is more generative, and it rejects that in favor of what is more powerful, what is more utilitarian, and then that is the thing that, like I said, myths are, this might be a Campbell quote, myths are a series of lies meant to reveal the truth. And I would say it's more like they're a series of feelings that construct your reality. They aren't true. They are just how you feel about stuff and how other people before you have felt about that same stuff, and it becomes truth in a moralistic kind of black and white sense. But ultimately, it fails to allow you to move towards true authenticity, because it's to move towards true authenticity is a threat to the myth. No. As we see in Moana, as we see in Encanto, as we see in Little Mermaid, all of these are images of the feminine trying to rise up and engage and live wholly, and being kind of suppressed by this one-sided sense of control and utility. Anyway, So that's a lot. So, Mike, like when you're walking, would you say your clients, the people you work with that seek you out, what is it that they're carrying? Like, what's the energy blockage in their life that's preventing them from moving forward, or that's at least leading them to seek you out?
Yeah, I don't know if I'd be able to, I don't know how to answer the energy blockage format, but ultimately, I mean, shame is a big part of it, right? Like there's so much shame around not even what they're doing, but who they are. So many queer people brought up in evangelicalism internalize this self-hatred. I mean, you think you have to if you're paying attention and actually taking what you're being told seriously. I don't know how you're going to not hate yourself, because you ultimately are aggressively encouraged to either be celibate or go through conversion or reparative quote unquote therapy to change your sexual orientation, which we know doesn't actually happen and it's not possible. So there's a lot of psychological damage that happens throughout that. And you misinterpret these wounds as you faithfulness to Jesus, right? And it's you doing the best you can to take up your cross and deny yourself, right? And like, let Christ take over or whatever. So I think a lot of people coming to me who end up on the other side of the table from me is they're dealing with fundamental, like subconscious ideas about themselves that tell them, I'm bad, I don't belong, there's not space for me, I'm not safe, I'm unwanted, right? These are like deeply ingrained ideas around their identity that I very much relate to, right? And so much of it is buried by theology and like traumatic things they've been told by important members of their family or things that happened to them. They can very easily recall very distinct moments in their childhood when someone said or did something and it like irrevocably impacted the way they knew how to show up in their families. And it's so sad to hear these stories regularly, but they're so common and the people around them don't even realize the impact that those things are having on them. Even if that person is somebody else today, like back then, when it was, anyway. So a lot of it is like they're walking around with this kind of recoil bracing for when the shoe is going to drop, right? And so I think a lot of them find me on social media when they hear the things I'm saying with the audacity and confidence that I'm saying them in. They're like, what are you talking about? How can you say these things? What do you know that I don't? Are you saying I don't have to hate myself? What does that look like, right? I think a lot of it is coming from this like desire for, can you give me a stronger, more powerful, more legitimate myth? Like, is there something better I can believe than what I currently have? Because you seem to be feeding on something that's different than what I'm feeding on because you look stronger or healthier than I do in this area. What do you have? Like, can I eat that too? Right? Is kind of the notion. And so I think a lot of it is coming from like deep-seated fear of rejection. Which sounds like cliche, but it's so true. There's such a strong sensitivity to being rejected, specifically for things you can't control. And then you can't anticipate when that rejection is going to hit because a lot of it happened when we were young and couldn't know any better, right? And then we start learning real fast, like, how do we never have this experience again? Oh, I can't be this way. I can't say these things. I can't like those things. So yeah, it's like a lot of having to like revisit and undo those messages,
Yeah. Yeah, the Connie Zweig, one of my favorite authors in this my work, shadow work, says it's kind of the ultimate double bind, where it's like when someone feels rejected, but there is a moral superiority actually in the persecution complex within Christianity, that to actually be rejected is a good thing. It's like, that should trigger pride in you. That should trigger that, I'm doing it right. And so I'm wondering, I'm curious about this more than stating it as fact, but the sense of rejection is hard to actually legitimize in yourself and to really fully feel and own, because on the other hand, you're told that you shouldn't, like, what you're feeling is not really the ultimate feeling. There's some other, this is for a purpose. This is, this is Jesus carrying his cross, and, he's asked you to carry this cross too, like, how do you untangle it? Because it feels like one of those finger traps that you get at a carnival. It's like, well, if you start pulling, you just feel more stuck. So how do you help people like get unstuck in that?
Yeah, for people where, because what you're describing totally, that is absolutely a thing. And for people who are like deeply in that place, often, if not every time, we go to the Bible. I get them to read some books. I'm like, let's read. We got to address like the ultimate authority of where these ideas are coming from. Let's talk about God's word, right? Let's look at, is this really, did God really, I'm like the serpent in the garden. Did God really say?
Did he do it?
Take your clothes off.
Like you throw the cloak up over your head.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, so it's like it's a lot of that actually. So I'll have them read books. Like, let's read this one first. And we often start with hell. I think that's usually a starting point for a lot of them. Let's just like address, is hell even real? Is that going to happen to you? Right? Let's talk about that. And like, where do these ideas come from? So I get to the root of where the base of these ideas was even like substantiated in their lives to begin with. And I just kind of help introduce some, what I would call healthy doubt around these very strong dogmatic ideas around what the cosmos is like and what God is like, and then therefore what they're allowed to experience.
Wait a second. Do you trademark this as healthy, like HELL?
I don't. Maybe I should. Yeah. So we pull those, we deconstruct, right? Like I kind of support them in a process of deconstructing, and we specifically, before talking about sexuality, are addressing, does the Bible actually say, and does it have the authority to, and blah, blah, like let's just look, And so naturally from actually looking at some scholarship and historicity around this, they're like, oh shit, right? Like just some light bulb aha moments start going off. And then I know we're getting some really good work done when they start getting angry. That means that the justice thing is starting to click, and they're starting to connect some dots, and they're starting to recognize like this should never have happened. This was never okay. They never had the authority to do this to me, right? And I'm like, yes. So like we don't get there very quickly, right? But like once the anger starts kicking in, I'm like, oh, thank God. So because for up until that point, I'm doing most of the labor of advocating for them, right? And like addressing the ways that they've been violated and erased and denied and gaslit and whatever. So when in that space, a lot of the time we're going back to the Bible and we're going to pull apart, like, where'd you get these ideas? Are they right?
Yeah. I mean, you're kind of going straight for the foundation. I mean, you could go in and rearrange some furniture, but ultimately, that foundation it's so embedded. I mean, we're talking generations. It's in the DNA.
It's this like untouchable boogeyman. Right. And so until the boogeyman can bleed, I don't know that we're going to get past him.
An untouchable boogeyman that we're told is also like God. I mean,
right.
I think I may have said this when you and I chatted last, but like one of the issues I think is the almost like enmeshment of Christianity's God image and their image of the devil or Satan. It's like, So there's this confusion about when a certain intuition or voice within you is the demon on your right shoulder or the angel on your left shoulder, and parsing out what is authentic or what is true, what is actually God, right? Because the devil could come as an angel of light, but the devil could come as like a actual boogeyman. And so unpacking like what you actually feel, feelings themselves have been demonized. So I'm sure you encounter that all the time. We're like, okay, I'm feeling this feels real, but I feel like I'm perhaps going too far, feeling into this too deep, and I need to trust some sort of exterior authority.
Yeah. I mean, so much of, autonomy and self-trust is, and not just for queer people, is taken away from and broken down systematically for anybody who's adhering to evangelical dogma. The heart is deceitfully wicked. Who could know it, right? Like we have a sin nature. Of course we do. Like, and then you have all this stuff that gets added to that tree. You can't trust yourself, right? Who are you going to trust? Your leaders, the Bible, what your leaders say the Bible says, right? Like that's where your ultimate source of like comfort and like confidence and security lies. Like, oh God, this gets really predatory really fast.
Yeah.
And anyway, so yeah, absolutely. Like learning to take back trust in themselves and their own autonomy and ability to like feel safe and confident in their choices, like that usually comes later, but it's an organic thing that shows itself as, but yeah.
So family, people you're working with a lot of individuals who are, would you say, in pretty conservative pockets of the country for the most part? Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not working with anybody in like cleaning spaces.
You're not pulling from the LA Fitness here in downtown Portland.
Right.
No. Yeah. By the way, I really need to get a new water bottle. I've posted about this on social media, but I had this water bottle. It's a Pride water bottle that I carried with me in a very red part of Oregon when I lived there. Well, now I'm in Portland, and that means something entirely different. And not only have I had the Pride water bottle, but the last 2 times I've gone to the gym, I've also grabbed a Valentine's Day towel, like a hand towel for wiping off sweat. So I think I'm putting out a lot of vibes unintentionally.
You came out of the gym with a boyfriend.
Yes, there were 2. There's this couple that I sat right across from at coffee at a completely different part of town. And then later that day, we were at LA Fitness together. And you go to Planet Fitness. The big mirror, and if someone's close to the mirror, but then you're working out behind them, there's this weird thing because you're looking at yourself in the mirror, but you're not far from the eye contact. There was so much eye contact at different times. And I get it. Like I'm also, I consider myself a little bit raised by gays. I think this would be a good article. Like so many of my closest friends, like throughout my late 20s and 30s are gay men. And like, I'm super, like, I think that's like, it makes it easy to navigate those spaces. And I get a little bit like, oh, I'm unaware of how I'm coming across though right now, as a straight man. So anyway, family.
Yeah.
Talk to me about family. I mean, because you're coming out of these conservative spaces, they're not just leaving the church that they were, attending. They're not having to just navigate that. They're navigating the complexity of very deep, intimate relationships.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think the majority of difficulty, the clients I work with who are in real time trying to come out or like, find pieces of themselves again, they all actively have members in their family who are homophobic. Often their parents. Some of them, it's their entire family, and that doesn't just go away, right? And it's a lot to navigate because they also have all this guilt of what they owe these people and what they have to be for these people. And so there's a lot to have to unpack and re-examine. And I'm over here being like this scary rule-breaking transgressor in their lives who they are like, please, I want you to be right, but also, are you ruining my life? Like there's that tension. And so I try to be as gentle and patient as I'm capable of being in this process, but also calling out the homophobia that they are just continuously enabling in these relationships with bad boundaries or, inappropriate expectations or whatever. So yeah, families, I mean, I've heard a bunch of horror stories of things their family members have said to them, have done to them, still are actively doing to them. Some of these people haven't met their nieces or nephews because the whole family has rejected them as like a valid human. And so they don't get access to important family events. They don't get invited. They don't get told. Some of them, like, this sounds dramatic, but like, I've had a couple clients who like they had a niece or a nephew born in the last year or so, and they were never told. They found out from someone else that their sibling had a kid. They're like, what? And I'm like, I'm trying to imagine what that would be like to feel that removed, that ostracized from my tribe, But it's not uncommon. And I'm like, it really boils me, like my blood. I'm like, this is not okay, right? And they're over here just like taking the scraps and like accepting what they can get. I'm like, we got to rearrange this scenario. You deserve better than this. You are not the problem. Your sexual orientation is not the problem. That is not the thing to be addressed here, So yeah, family is a huge source of active, real pain for many of the people I work with. A lot of like current, present hurt is coming from people who refuse to understand them, and this process takes a long time, and they still have this hope that their mom, their dad, their whoever is going to come around. And I remember that I had that hope for my parents. And some part of me will always, right? Like we'll always have that hope. And yet, the lack of progress that you see over years with people in these positions, I'm like, how long are you going to continue to suspend your own well-being, your own fullness, your own happiness for this person's discomfort around the fact that you are what you are in their life? Like, it's a lot to unpack. And so some of it is like them getting to the place of accepting who their family members actually are to them, as opposed to who they think they're supposed to be, or they want them to be, or need them to be. And that's a whole grieving process, right? Like, that's a lot to have to work through, and it's really sad and scary. And so, there's a lot of effort that goes toward creating chosen family outside of these really painful family dynamics, and finding a support system that isn't your family because they refuse to be family to you, and having to redefine what does family look like for you in your mind. Would you treat somebody this way? Let me just say back to you what you told me, right? Like, if one of your friends were to treat you this way, right? Or if you were to do this to somebody else, do you think they'd want to stay in a relationship with you? And they're like, of course not. I'm like, okay, did you hear what you just told me? And they're like, right? So they cognitively can recognize this is so toxic and dysfunctional, but the emotional tie is so deep, right? Like, the psychological need for this bond is so intense. Like, even genetically, we're kind of wired, to cleave to these connections, and I get it. But yeah, there's a lot of pain there, and it can go in lots of different directions, because the families, the person and their temperament and their circumstances are all variables. But I mean, I don't know that I have many clients I work with who don't have homophobic families. It's pretty common for my space.
Yeah, well, heteronormativity it's one of the included items included in the package, the package deal of Christianity. Right. So it's not even a thing until it is a thing, and then you're like, oh, but it. Queer individuals know they're not safe. I mean, children, all children know what safety feels like without, cognitively being able to articulate that. They feel it. And if you feel something inside of you that is not going to be received outside, I mean, this is shadow 101, 101, where things that are not accepted are what go into the shadow. So, yeah, sexuality it's an intuitive thing. You do it unconsciously to protect yourself, to survive. And maybe that's the question here is you're helping people learn how to live rather than just survive, but you're almost initiating them into that new paradigm of living and thriving versus just surviving. Like, that threshold that you stand at and you welcome people in and you introduce them, do you find that you have not just resistance? Of course there's going to be that resistance, but that's a lot of energy that you're holding. What is in those moments, in those relationships with those clients, what do you experience? How is that connected to your new or most authentic spirituality? I mean, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I experience a lot of sadness and grief with, alongside them. It's really painful to sit with them in these stories. I mean, I'm thankful they're willing to share, and I'm glad that I'm a safe space they get to finally talk about these things, and that I'm not going away. They can spend time and get deeper and actually unpack this stuff. But yeah, there are definitely sessions where I'll walk away and I'll feel just heavy in my soul. God, that was heavy. And I don't feel I wish I hadn't done that, or I regret that session. It's more I just feel so sad for this person being in the circumstances and having the history that they have. The empathy side of that is just I don't know how to not feel sad with them. It's, there's a lot of heavy emotion that comes with it. I sometimes, not always, but sometimes I will end up crying in a session with them. Just listen to what they're saying. God, this is horrible what you're telling me, and it's not something that happened a long time ago. It's currently happening right now. So there's pain there. I feel a weird mix of grief and privilege, a swell of pride to get to be a loud, obvious, safe place for people to find, and then be able to visit these parts of themselves, because a lot of them, some of the stuff will come up they haven't thought about in a long time, or they don't talk about with anybody, right? Because they just haven't found spaces where this would be welcome. Even queer spaces, like sometimes they're not going to sit there and listen to you long enough for you to actually get to, being able to touch that part of yourself.
Yeah.
So I feel honored. It's like this weird contradiction of like, this is horrible. And I'm also so thankful to get to hold this space and provide this support. Because this is stuff that I needed, right? When I came out, like, and I couldn't find that. I'm not saying stuff like this didn't exist when I came out, but like, I didn't know who those people were. I didn't know how to find them, right? So there's a part of me that feels like there's some redemption maybe in a twisted way, that like I'm getting to like push back on things that I suffered, and watching people have options and accelerating the painful process and fallout of the grief of their heteronormative persona that they, were hiding behind for so long. It's like, it's heavy energy. Sometimes I need to go find someone in my real life and get a hug, just to like co-regulate and come back to myself and whatever. But I do find a deep sense of like fulfillment and like meaning in being able to mourn with those who mourn, like there is something communal about that. And we have a bonding experience of having survived homophobia that feels really redemptive and like meaningful to me. So I don't know. Am I answering your question?
Yeah. Well, I mean, you kind of you seem like a first responder of sorts, right? Like you really are this kind of first kind face, which could be a terrifying experience to begin with, but if you go to rescue someone who it feels like I can't leave this, like, yeah, that's going to be a terrifying experience to leave the thing they've always known. But the job of any first responder is, let's get you to safety.
Yeah.
And I think it can't be understated how unsafe. I mean, I just want to like maybe name this very explicitly, that the further into the story of Western Christianity, let's call it evangelicalism, let's call it the common Christian myth, the further we get into that, the more one-sided and destructive it is becoming. So maybe I just want to like say this to anyone listening who's still trying to negotiate the threshold of like, I know that my house is flooded, but I don't want to leave what little I know. I want to find a way to make this work. You can keep choosing that, and it will take everything from you. And I said this when I was a pastor, like, well, it was right at the end of being a pastor, because it was after the years of doing it, that I don't think that evangelicalism welcomes any one person 100%. Now, the closer you are to cis, het, white, male, attractive, upwardly mobile, the closer you are to that ideal, the more percentage of you it may just automatically accept. But even that person, I have seen just completely collapse at how much energy they've exerted to maintain the persona that it got them accepted in the first place. And so I truly do see the work you're doing as this first responder, because I think the context of evangelicalism is actually destructive for people. It's not good for them. It's like it's a public health crisis, if we still had, a CDC, of course. Too soon. No, it's okay. We're good. Just don't need vaccines. Just drink some tea or something.
Some dirt on it.
Some dirt on it. God.
Yeah. No, you're right, Michael. Like there is a first responder component to this. It does feel like there's a triage situation happening, and the nature of the work has more of an emergency, urgent type vibe to it. Yeah, and what's interesting too is like I've got clients who are actively, regularly working with a therapist, but their therapist just isn't familiar with or trained in the evangelical component of it, and so they don't get the religious trauma part of things, and so their therapist is like, I need you to find somebody who gets this part of you and works, and so it's also cool to get to like collaborate with their therapist and help them piece this together. And but yeah, you're right, there's absolutely like a first responder vibe to that. It's a really good way to put that.
Yeah. Well, Mike, as we kind of wrap up here, some questions. When you think about, like, what's your favorite part of this work? Like, in a word, a sentence, what is it that brings you life? Like, what keeps you coming back to this day in, day out?
I guess I would have, I mean, I feel like there are a bunch of answers to that, but like, if I can simplify it, probably seeing the light in their eyes when they like start getting giddy and childish, childlike again, and they're like, wait, I can kiss a boy? I can go on dates? Like, like there's all of a sudden this like permission and opportunity, and their future gets to be bigger than it's ever been before. That is really rewarding because it feels like we're saving somebody's life in some ways, right? Like their future gets to be theirs again. And that just feels so profound because I remember what it was like to not have one, or to have one that I cared about or wanted to be part of. And so for me, getting to kick the teeth in on despair or hopelessness, and like watch the light break into someone's soul again, that is super rewarding. Yeah.
And what have you heard people say is their favorite thing about you in this work? Like clients who are like, Mike, it wasn't the thing you said, it was this, or, what has surprised you about how people experience you in that kind of threshold, first responder space?
I guess I'm trying to think of like actual things people have said to me. I'm trying to find like a common thread because, they tend to be pretty unique. But if I can generalize, I think they're like, I'm so thankful that you are outspoken and that you say the things that you say. It gives me permission to think differently. You say things I wish I could believe, you make me think that, this can get better. You are making me believe my life can be better. And I'm like, oh God, that's super rewarding because it came at a price, right? Like I had to pay a price to like pull that off. And so to know that it's having that kind of impact helps it, not that it wouldn't have been worth it anyway, but it helps like counteract so much of the toxicity and loss and like attack that I got to experience. That's so beautiful, right? And just helps increase the feeling of worthwhile that the whole thing has been. Yeah.
Okay. So tell us, how can people find you? How can people take steps to connect with you in this work? If they're like, this is me. You're like, their heart is on fire with, John Wesley style. Jesus, so much fire imagery. Can we chill out about it? How can people connect with you? Like what are the steps people can take to get into your orbit and try to get some of that goodness?
Thanks for asking. I think one of the most fun ways is just on my Instagram. So at Mike Maeshiro. My Instagram is probably the most active space that I have on the internet. I'm also on YouTube. I have a podcast. I have a website. So you can go to mikemaeshiro.com. That's where a lot of my work is hosted. So if you want to be part of one of the groups that I facilitate or just engaging with coaching or whatever, that's going to be where you want to go. But Instagram is probably the most fun and also the most like connected to the things that I'm actively doing. Work I'm putting out, probably those ways.
Okay. Well, Mike, thanks for being with us today. This is such a gift, and it'll find its way into the nooks and crannies. And your work is crucial, and it's life-saving work, especially right now. So thank you for doing it.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm honored to be here. And just love getting to speak to all this. Thanks for hosting it.
Yeah, absolutely. Hi, Michael here. Hey, seriously, thank you for listening and engaging the Inner Work Community podcast. I trust today's episode gave you something to reflect on or illuminated a new trailhead to your hidden life. If this episode resonated with you, you can subscribe, share it with your people, and leave a review. That really helps spread the word and boost our online presence in this digital world. Remember, growth is not a straight line, and we're all figuring it out as we go. I'm grateful to be in this unfolding and excavating work with you. So until next time, be yourself. You've got a good self. And remember, it's all a gift.